She was told she didn't belong there, simply because she was black and dressed too simply. Naomi Carter walked into the same restaurant where she and her husband had their first date to reserve a table. But the staff didn't see a woman in love. They saw a black woman who didn't fit in. They laughed and dismissed her. A few minutes later, a black Porsche pulled up. And when her billionaire husband stepped out, the entire room fell silent. What happened next exposed the ugly truth hidden behind luxury and racial prejudice. Naomi Carter got out of the car and stepped onto the sidewalk in front of the Monarch Room restaurant. Her beige flat shoes made no sound on the stone as she approached the heavy glass doors of the city's most exclusive restaurant, a place so revered that it rarely accepted visitors without a reservation. But she wasn't here for dinner, not yet. She just wanted to quietly reserve a table for something personal, something symbolic. At 35, Naomi behaved like someone who had long since stopped trying to prove anything to anyone. A soft cardigan gently hugged her shoulders, and traces of clay from the art therapy class she had attended that afternoon remained under her fingernails. She wore no designer clothes, no shiny jewelry, no elegant handbag, only calm confidence and a clear purpose. The Monarch Hall had special significance for her. 14 years ago, it was here that her husband, Julian Carter, once a poor but brilliant engineer, nervously squeezed her hand through the white tablecloth and promised to build something important. She believed him. Now Julian was one of the most sought-after experts in renewable energy. Their lives had changed. But Naomi? She still believed that important moments required a personal presence, especially when it came to booking a specific table for an anniversary dinner at the place where it all began. She walked through the door and immediately felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Good evening," she said with a warm smile. Madeline, the restaurant owner, dressed in a strict black suit with her light hair pulled back into a tight, sculpted bun, glanced at Naomi. "No name, no greeting. I'd like to reserve a table," Naomi continued, not giving up. "For next Friday. It's our anniversary. This place means a lot to us." Madeline's expression didn't change, but there was a familiar tone in her voice, polished hospitality barely concealing arrogance. "I'm afraid we're fully booked for the next 6 weeks, ma'am." Naomi nodded calmly. "I thought so, but I figured if I came in person, maybe left a deposit, you might have a cancellation list?" Before Madeline could respond, she was interrupted by a loud, nasal voice with an arrogant undertone. "Madeline, what's the delay? I asked for the main room, not the back wall." Naomi turned and recognized him immediately, Elliot Braxton. Inventory manager. Podcast populist. The kind of guy who treats wealth like a weapon. Madeline's eyes lit up. "Mr. Braxton, I'll take care of it right away." Elliot's gaze slid over Naomi as if she were a smudge on a mirror. "I didn't know this establishment was accepting walk-ins from the grocery department." Madeline tried to smile. She was just leaving. Naomi calmly crossed her arms. "Actually, I was just asking about reservations." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "And I just asked for my wine. But I guess standards aren't mandatory anymore." Naomi didn't blink. "I understand that this restaurant caters to a certain clientele. I just hoped that memories were more important than appearances." Elliot smirked. "How sweet." Madeline cleared her throat, shifting her gaze from one to the other. "Ma'am, as I said, we're fully booked. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the bistros downtown." Naomi felt her face flush, not with embarrassment, but with indignation. "And are your standards," she asked quietly, "measured by the fabric of your tablecloths or the size of your bank account?" Elliot laughed loudly. "Well, I'd say you don't fit either description." Several patrons at neighboring tables smirked. The manager, a woman in a dark blue suit with an iPad under her arm, noticed them and was now walking toward them with practiced importance. "Is something wrong here?" she asked in a voice as smooth as lacquer. Madeline replied without hesitation. This woman was just leaving. Naomi straightened up. "Actually, I wanted to reserve a table for our anniversary next Friday. My husband and I." The manager cut her off sharply. "Ma'am, you're interfering with our work." Naomi blinked. "Because I asked to reserve a table? I'm afraid I have to ask you to leave." Elliot leaned over to the next table and whispered, not so quietly, "This place is going downhill fast." The manager nodded slightly. "Marcus," she called to a young man in a black vest standing nearby. "Could you show this woman out?" Marcus hesitated. "Is that really necessary?" The manager's tone became more stern. "Right now." Naomi looked around at the faces that avoided her gaze, those who didn't notice her, those who didn't care, those who knew nothing. She sighed slowly. She could have called out his name. She could have put an end to all this. but she didn't want to win by using her position. So she nodded to Marcus and headed for the exit. Stopping at the door of the Monarch room, she didn't want them to see her trembling, didn't want to look back through the glass where the laughter and clinking of glasses continued as if she were a stain wiped from their evening. Just another woman mistaken for someone less important. She reached into her bag, took out her phone, her finger hovering over Julian's name. She wasn't going to call him. Not like this. Not today. Not because of this. But the burning in her throat and the tightness in her chest pressed against her pride like a wave crashing against a breakwater. Before she could touch the screen, a low, unmistakable rumble rolled down the street, smooth and restrained, powerful, needing no confirmation. It was Julian's car. The black Porsche stopped right in front of her, its curves reflecting every ray of light from the restaurant's golden canopy, as if the car had been made for moments like this. The driver's door opened and Julian Carter stepped out. He wasn't dressed for dinner, but for a meeting, dark gray pants, a white shirt, no tie, no frills, but there was something about his gait that made her turn around without even recognizing his face. His gaze immediately fell on Naomi. He frowned. Her posture, her expression, her hands, still clutching the phone. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly, already reaching out to take her hand. Naomi said nothing. Julian looked past her, through the glass doors, where Madeline had returned to her seat and was now standing straight, her eyes wide, betraying that she had recognized someone. Behind her, Dean's manager was conferring with Elliot Braxton, who sat at his desk with a smug expression on his face, as if nothing in the world could bother him. Julian looked at the building, then back at his wife. "Did someone hurt you?" Naomi hesitated. "I was trying to make a reservation. At the restaurant where we had our first date. I was told that people like me aren't welcome here." Julian didn't ask any more questions. He walked over, opened the door, and held it for her, like a man born to open doors, not out of politeness, but because he had always done so that all doors would be open for his wife. Silence fell in the room. The conversation stopped. Everyone turned around. Forks froze in midair. Madeline paled. Dina froze mid-sentence, staring at Julian as she realized with a sharp clarity that the man she had let go was not just a random visitor, but one of the most influential people in the city. Julian spoke quietly, his voice even. "I believe my wife was here earlier." Madeline tried to keep her voice steady. Yes, sir. Just a little misunderstanding. We didn't know she was." "She is Naomi Carter," Julian interrupted, still calm and unperturbed. "She doesn't need to explain who she is to reserve a table at a restaurant." Behind them, Elliot Braxton muttered something about people being too sensitive these days. Julian turned slowly, deliberately. "Excuse me, who are you?" Elliot looked up, confused. "I'm a regular." Julian nodded. "And that gives you the right to insult strangers?" Elliot shifted nervously, glancing at the manager for support, but Dina was already frozen in place, her eyes wide as she watched her evening unravel. Naomi stepped forward, her voice firm. "They asked me to leave. They said I didn't meet their standards." Julian kept his eyes on Dina. "Then let's talk about your standards." He looked directly at Dina. "What are they? What standards prevent a woman from ordering her own food? What standards determine who can stay and who can't?" Dina forced herself to smile, but it didn't reach the corners of her mouth. "Sir, please, this is all a misunderstanding." "No," Naomi said quietly, "that's not true." Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He was already in control. "She came here with dignity," he said, pointing at Naomi. "And you treated her like a stranger." "Let me ask you something," he said, stepping forward slowly. "How many people have you rejected like her, who didn't have a husband with a recognizable face or a name that would open doors?" Dina opened her mouth but said nothing. Julian turned to Madeline. "You knew. The moment you saw her again, you knew you had made a mistake." She lowered her eyes. "And yet you let it happen." The restaurant fell silent. Even the kitchen was quiet. Only one person dared to speak. Elliot Braxton. "Listen, not everyone knows who's who. This isn't a courtroom. It's a restaurant." Julian turned to him. "No. It's a reflection. Of values. Of who we reward and who we despise. And sometimes it only takes a moment, one mistake, to show who we really are." Naomi gently touched Julian's hand. "It's okay." But he looked at her and said, "No, Naomi, it's not. Not for you. Not for anyone who's ever been treated like this." She nodded, not taking her eyes off him. And at that moment, the atmosphere in the room changed again. But this time, it was in their favor. The silence in the Monarch Hall was not empty. It was thick, alive, filled with tension. All eyes in the room were on Julian and Naomi, but no one said a word. Dina stood behind the presenter's desk, clutching her tablet as if it could protect her from what was about to happen, and Madeline's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing a spark of genuine fear. Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to speak loudly. He had authority. "I asked a question," he said, looking straight at Dina. "On what grounds did you ask my wife to leave?" Dina opened her mouth to respond, but Naomi interrupted her, her voice calm and surprisingly clear. "I was told that this establishment serves a certain clientele, and that I don't meet those requirements." Julian tilted his head. "Not suitable based on what criteria? Your shoes? Your cardigan? The fact that you have a little clay under your fingernails because you spent all day helping children express themselves through art." From the far end of the restaurant, Elliot Braxton snorted contemptuously. "This is getting dramatic. People are constantly asked to leave restaurants. It's not personal." Julian turned slowly. "You always sound so confident when you're wrong." Elliot laughed nervously but didn't respond. Julian continued, his tone unchanged. "My wife's name is Naomi Carter. Maybe when she walked in, it didn't mean anything to you, but it should have." He paused, letting the silence linger until it became painful. "She's the co-founder of the Carter Initiative, the largest private foundation supporting young artists in the Southeast. She serves on the board of 3 nonprofit organizations, including the Children's Mental Wellness Alliance, and last year, she personally funded a city program that provides free mental health services to children from disadvantaged schools." Madeline paled noticeably. Dina blinked and looked at the screen, as if a list of her mistakes she didn't even know about might suddenly appear. She didn't come here asking for special treatment. She didn't brag about her connections, wave her business card around, or mention our foundation. She came here as she is, and that was never enough for you, was it? Naomi took a step forward, her voice soft but sharper than any accusation. "What if I weren't married to Julian? What if I were just myself? A woman who wanted to celebrate something important with the man she loves?" Dina exhaled with difficulty. "Mrs. Carter, I didn't know." "No," Naomi said. "You knew. You just didn't know who I was. Only what I looked like." At the next table, a woman in a dark green dress, elderly, elegant, shifted in her chair. She whispered something to the man next to her, then stood up. Her voice was clear and calm. "She's right," said the woman. "We've been dining here for 15 years, and we've seen the service become colder and the smiles more selective." Dina turned sharply toward her. "Mrs. Alcott." But the woman shook her head. "No. Tonight has confirmed everything we've quietly suspected. That your standards are no longer about quality. They're about control and exclusivity." Her husband stood beside her. "We won't be back." A sigh swept through the room. Elliot Braxton looked as if he hadn't swallowed a piece of steak. Dina opened her mouth again, but this time no words came out. And then, like a crack in frozen ice, a new voice rang out. "I walked her out." Everyone turned. Marcus, the young waiter who had served them earlier, stood behind the reception desk, his voice trembling slightly, but he held his chin high. "I didn't want to. I knew it was wrong, but I was told to do it." Julian looked at him. "You're the only one who even asked a question." Marcus nodded. "Because I saw what no one else wanted to see. That she was calm, respectful, and trying to be polite, even when we were kicking her out." Madeline pressed her lips together. Marcus, not now. But he stepped forward anyway, removing his apron. "I've worked here for 2 years, and I've seen how people are treated here. If they come in wearing suits, with names, they're greeted with a smile. If not, they're greeted with silence. Or worse." Dina's eyes flashed. "You're making a scene." "No," Marcus said. "You made a scene when you decided who deserved respect and who didn't." Naomi looked at him with quiet gratitude and, for the first time that evening, felt less alone in this glass palace of appearances. Julian turned to Dina. "You asked the wrong woman to leave." Then he asked Naomi quietly, "Do you want to stay?" Naomi smiled. "I'd rather go where kindness doesn't depend on the quality of your clothes or how much money you have." Julian nodded. They turned toward the door. But the moment wasn't over yet. As Naomi and Julian turned toward the exit, something changed in the room again, not just the silence, but the energy. It wasn't reverence. It was something closer to shame. Quiet, heavy, collective. The kind of pressure that arises when people realize they have become complicit by doing nothing. And before they reached the door, Deanna stepped forward with that fake professional urgency that comes when damage control is no longer a choice but a reflex. "Mr. Carter, please wait," she called, her voice trembling. "Let's not make this worse. We'd be happy to offer you a separate table, right now, on the house." Julian didn't slow down. "You mean now that you know who she is?" Dina tried to recover. "We sincerely regret how things turned out. It's all a misunderstanding." Naomi turned slightly. "You keep using that word. Misunderstanding. As if you accidentally condemned me. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a decision." Behind Dina, Madeline stepped back toward the podium, her hands no longer resting confidently on the marble surface. Now she looked smaller, less well-groomed. And when she glanced at Marcus, still holding the apron, something like panic flashed in her eyes. She had lost control of the room. "You have to stay," Dina insisted, her voice almost pleading. "Please. Let us show you that we can fix this." Naomi stopped at the door and slowly turned to face the room. There was no anger in her voice. There was no emotion. There was only truth. "You can't fix something that was never wrong," she said. Pause. "Kindness doesn't work that way. It's not a dish on the menu you choose when the bill gets too high." She looked around at the guests. Some turned away. Others stared straight at her, unsure of where they now stood in this invisible hierarchy that had suddenly collapsed under its own weight. And then something unexpected happened. The third table stood up. A man in his 50s, dressed in a strict gray suit with a silver watch, clearly complying with all the unspoken rules of the monarch room, placed his napkin on the table and said quietly but clearly, "My wife and I will no longer patronize an establishment that treats women this way." His wife followed his example, saying nothing, only nodding to Naomi with quiet respect, which made Madeline cower even more behind the bar. Elliot Braxton, still seated but now clearly fidgeting, chuckled softly. "You'd think someone died, the way everyone's acting." Julian slowly turned his head. "Are you still talking?" The phrase sounded like a slap in the face. Elliot froze. But it was Marcus, standing awkwardly in his waiter's uniform without an apron, who stepped forward again. "If I may," he said, looking at Naomi, "I know you probably want to leave, but thank you for not just walking away. Most people would have." Naomi looked at him. Then she nodded. "And thank you for saying that, even though it wasn't easy." Julian added, "You did better than your manager." Dina tensed, her composure melting away thread by thread. "Mr. Carter, please, this is turning into something much bigger than—" "It already has," Naomi interrupted. "You just didn't know who you were doing it to." A bright light flashed in the window. A man with a phone had just taken a picture of them from the sidewalk. Then another. And that was the beginning of the end. After all, recognition, especially of a billionaire, spreads quickly. And within seconds, someone inside the restaurant opened their phone and whispered Julian's name too loudly. By the time the fourth table stood up and started gathering their coats, it was no longer about the couple at the door. It was about the fact that everyone else had suddenly realized that they had just witnessed something that couldn't be ignored. Dina took her last breath. "Last chance. Mr. Carter. Mrs. Carter. We can apologize publicly. We can meet with you. Just give us a chance to make this right." Julian looked at her. Then he said, with controlled calm, "You won't fix this with a free dinner or a press release. You'll fix it by changing the way you treat people before they become headline news." With that, they stepped out into the cool night air. But the monarch room was still burning behind them, not with fire, but with consequences. The door closed behind them with a soft hiss, but it could have been a steel door closing off the kingdom that had finally revealed its walls. Naomi took a deep breath. The fresh air was cold on her skin, but cleaner than anything inside. She stood next to Julian, and neither of them spoke. The street was quieter than usual, but not silent. Across the road, a woman stopped half a step away and whispered something to her friend, nodding toward Julian. Two teenagers on the corner pretended not to be looking and took out their phones. Julian adjusted his coat without turning around. "I didn't want to make a scene," he said quietly. Naomi looked at him. "It's not you. It's them." Pause. She added, "You just didn't let them pretend nothing happened." Julian looked at her, a smile playing on his lips, but there was no trace of amusement in his eyes. "Are you sure you're okay?" Naomi nodded. "I've been through worse. But this was different, uglier." He nodded. "More sophisticated." Behind them, a faint movement caught their attention. Through the tall glass windows, the interior of the monarch room looked like a museum after closing time, frozen, broken, fragile. Dina stood at the front podium, her shoulders tense, talking urgently to someone on her earpiece. Madeline had disappeared. Elliot Braxton remained seated at his table, like a statue in a crumbling gallery, sipping his drink without much enthusiasm. But it wasn't any of them who caught Julian's attention. It was Marcus. The young waiter left the room, taking off his vest and pinning his name tag to the coat he was holding. He looked uncertain, like a man teetering on the brink of something bigger than he expected. "Mr. Carter?" he asked cautiously. Julian turned around, and Naomi followed him. Marcus cleared his throat, then took a step forward. "I know you don't owe me any time, but I couldn't go back there. Not after what happened. And I just wanted to say I'm really sorry." Naomi bowed her head. "You don't have to apologize for them." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not apologizing for them. I'm apologizing for myself. I let it happen. I didn't speak up until it was safe to do so." There was a silence. A good silence. Julian looked at him for a long time. It takes courage to say that. Most people never even get that far. Marcus exhaled, and some invisible weight lifted from his shoulders. "I've been thinking about leaving for months," he admitted. "About how they treat some of the guests. About the prejudice. About the fake politeness. I kept telling myself it wasn't my fight." Naomi smiled faintly. "And today it became your fight." "Yes," Marcus said, a little surprised at how true it sounded. "I guess it is." Julian took a business card out of his jacket, dark blue, simple, with silver lettering. "This is my direct number," he said. "If you ever decide to do something else, something important, give me a call." Marcus took the card as if it might dissolve in his hands if he wasn't careful. "Are you serious?" Julian nodded. "You saw something was wrong. You spoke up. That's more than most people with 10 times your salary and the same protection would do." Naomi added, "If you ever have an idea, a real idea about how to change things, not just in restaurants, but in how people accept each other, how they look at each other, how they're included in society, give us a call." Marcus blinked. "I don't even know what I could do." "That's okay," Julian said. "Most good ideas don't come from knowledge. They come from caring." Behind them, the restaurant doors opened again, but this time no one came out. The guest glanced outside and quickly turned back, unsure whether to follow the couple who had just left or pretend nothing had happened. It didn't matter. The moment had already left the building. Naomi moved closer to Julian and took his hand. "So where are we really going to have dinner?" He looked at her with a tenderness that cut through everything that had just happened. "Somewhere where no one cares what shoes you're wearing." Naomi smiled. "Perfect." They turned and walked together past the waiting cars, the quiet whispers, and the watching eyes. Behind them, through the gleaming windows of a place that once called itself elite, the ruins of a reputation built on false pride were visible. Have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance? Share your experience in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about justice, click the like button and subscribe to hear more inspiring stories that remind us of what really matters in life. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to know.